Welcome to Leading from the Middle, a podcast exploring instructional coaching leadership through the lens of Black women instructional coaches, also known as BWICs. I'm your host, Dr. Courtney Tate. As a researcher and leadership coach, I study how coaches navigate identity, resilience, intellectual contribution, change agency, and belonging, all while leading from the heart of our school systems. Whether you're a coach or a school leader, this show is here to help you strengthen your impact and establish your voice while leading from the middle. Now, let's dive into today's conversation. Welcome back to Leading from the Middle. I'm your host, Dr. Courtney Tate. In our last episode, we broke down the BWIC Leadership Framework and identified its 5 dimensions. Today, we're going to go a little bit deeper into the first dimension, which is identity. We're going to be discussing how you move from being one of the teachers in the building to an instructional authority without the administrative role or title. We are also going to discuss how you navigate the identity paradox of being seen when there's a fire or an urgency, but being unseen when it's time for instructional strategy and insight. Joining me today to help answer these questions is a guest who lives at the intersection of practice and preparation. She's a former state-level instructional coach, professor, and a mentor who is currently training the next generation of instructional leaders. Please welcome a dear friend and colleague, Dr. Shanita Anderson, to the show.
Thank you so much, Courtney, for that introduction. I am really excited to be here. This conversation that we're about to engage in is one that really sits close to my heart because, as you mentioned, so much of my work has been supporting instructional coaches and teacher leaders who are actually in this role doing this powerful work. And honestly, that idea of identity and how we see ourselves and how that shapes how we show up. That's such a big part of any leader's journey. So thank you so much for having me.
Of course, I'm excited to jump into the conversation with you as well. And identity absolutely shapes so much of the leadership journey. Before we jump in, Dr. A or Dr. Anderson, I wanted to frame this finding from my dissertation. As you mentioned, it is super important for any leader to figure out their identity. But one thing that I found was that BWICs, Black Women Instructional Coaches, for them, it wasn't just about getting the job. In general, in the world of instructional coaching or instructional leadership, we know that there's going to be that transition from peer to leader. But for BWICs, I found that identity isn't just about getting the job done correctly or learning new skills. It's about resisting the external labels often placed on us, which is where they find themselves having to redefine, or for some, define their leadership identity. These labels can cause the system to view a BWIC differently from her peers, perhaps seeing her as something other than a strategic instructional leader. I wanted to name that from the start so that as we get into our conversation, we can reference back to that throughout the discussion. Now, let's get started. You've worked with a lot of teachers, current and or aspiring instructional leaders. When you mentor or train new coaches, do you see the journey from peer to instructional leader as the first hurdle that they face?
Oh, absolutely. I'm still thinking back to you referencing your dissertation work, and I feel compelled to say that I am still so honored to have chaired your dissertation. And I say that word loosely because a little bragging rights on our host for today. She, as you all know, or you will learn to know, she is that type of leader, that type of BWIC that takes charge of her presence in any type of situation. So I think it's only appropriate that this is the episode that we're talking about identity. So let me get back to your question. One of the biggest things that I see is that transition from being a classroom teacher and then transitioning over into this, and I'm doing air quotes, leadership role, because it is that in between space. It is understanding how do I show up in this role without um, without my peers seeing me as someone that's trying to be authoritative, right? That they are working alongside their peers and not being someone that is trying to tell them what to do, to put frankly, or to point out any wrongdoings, but to be that reflective partner. So that is absolutely something that I constantly am having to engage in conversations with new instructional coaches or anyone in that's transitioning from being a classroom teacher into a leadership role.
Absolutely. It's a big transition because you have to figure out, how do I handle the people who I was just working alongside, right? We were just working knee deep in it together, and now I've transitioned into this role, and it's a delicate way that you have to embrace that transition so that you're seen in the authoritative light or leadership light that you want to be seen in. I have a question that's going to go a little bit more personal, and you can start this off by telling a little bit more about your background. I tried to cue you up and give you an introduction,
Mhm.
but I want to give you a chance to add anything if you would like. But the question that I'm going to open us up with that relates to you is, when you moved from the classroom to the coach's office, when was that first moment that you realized that your identity had shifted in the eyes of your peers?
Oh, that's such a great question, Courtney. Um, I was at a middle school, and at that time it was a rather small middle school, and we really got to know each other very well. It was a family atmosphere. My then principal did a phenomenal job of building the right learning culture. And we all know that learning culture is such a huge part of any successful instructional coach. Um, and when we transitioned from this small school setting to a bigger setting is when I moved into this role of being the instructional coach. And it was during the interview process, actually, Courtney. It was
Mm,
a position that was started by the then governor, Jim Hunt. He was initiating this initiative where he was putting 200 literacy coaches across the state. It was this big, huge thing. And the entire school improvement team had to interview me. And during that interview, my peers were asking me these questions. And before the interview, it was rah, 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 go Shanita, go Shanita. But in the interview, whew, I felt the fire under my feet. These questions were coming left and right, left and right. And I looked around the room and I thought, oh my gosh, I, I thought that this was going to be a different type of setup. And in that process, the questions that were coming at me, and one of them particularly came from someone that was really close to me. And this question was kind of like a question that you wouldn't necessarily, I don't remember the question or I would quote it at this time, but it definitely left a mark on me. It was a question that you would not have thought would come from someone that was, in quotes, a friend at that time, a friend slash colleague. And when I left out of that interview, I felt like all eyes were on me, and they were wanting to see me move from beyond that person where everybody joined in the classroom at the end of the day, because that's how it happens, that informal leadership.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Teachers will come to your room, sit in your classroom, they will talk with you, they will share stories of triumphs and challenges and dealing with students and dealing with parents. But at this point, they wanted to see me as that instructional leader. And I was not prepared in that moment for that transition to happen almost instantaneously.
Mm-hmm.
And from that, it just started to evolve. And I recognized that I needed to step up my game. I needed to step up my communication practices. I needed to step up and show them that I knew structures, that I knew processes and procedures. And that's when they started to see me differently because I was showing up differently.
That is a great story that so many people probably face, because there isn't a big transition, right? A lot of people think because you're a great teacher, you have those insights, you're going to be a great coach or instructional leader, which is not always true. There are things that you have to learn and you have to navigate really how to establish yourself as an authority. And so thinking about that and your experience, I don't know if I want to say how do you establish yourself as an authority or what insight would you give someone transitioning, right, from that peer into that instructional leadership or instructional coaching role? What insight would you give them on how they can establish themselves as an authority? You alluded to it, but I want you to give me a little bit more.
It's how you show up. It's how you show up in the room. It's the it's in those micro moments. It's in the moment where you are consistent. It is in the moment where you're supportive. It's in the moment where you show up and are supportive. It's in those um the everyday little nuances. It's the noticing. It's the remembering that they have a lesson coming up that may require and you start with the little small things first,
Yes.
that may require, I'm really stretching here, but may require a cutout to be made if you're in elementary. And you do those things for them. I call them the low-hanging fruits of instructional coaching because they're gateway keepers. They kind of let you into that teacher's learning space. It's in the helping them to unpack data in those quiet moments, but you don't want recognition for it. You're kind of playing in the back seat and you're walking them through it. It's in the what else is there? It's in those moments where you build them up and you put the spotlight on them. Being an instructional coach and being a leader that's in that in between space, you're no longer having that spotlight on you. When others are able to shine, that's when you shine. And trust me, the shine will come back to you when they are able to be successful. So I hope I answered that
Absolutely.
question.
You did. And it's also, that's a little piece of the buy-in, right? So when people know what coaching is for, you are also a resource to those that you serve. I feel like being an instructional coach, you are serving the teachers and the students in your building. And so it's definitely those small moments of getting the buy-in. But I used to also tell folks when I worked in a school and when I worked at the district level that my agenda is your agenda because everybody would want to know, well, what's your agenda? Everybody comes in and they have an agenda. And as an instructional coach, my agenda was to help you be better at whatever your goal is for you to be better at, or whatever the goal is you're trying to reach. And so when you have those micro moments, then people can see that you are genuinely there to support
Mhm,
them. You don't think you are above helping with the bulletin board or helping with the cutout, or sometimes I would get in and help with a small group.
mhm,
Whatever it was that I saw there was a need, if I was able to get in without, of course, throwing off all of my other responsibilities, then I'm there to make sure that teacher gets what they need to be better at doing their role and serving their students effectively. So I love that. I now want to shift it a little bit to talk about Black women in leadership. So this goes for Black women in leadership, but this also goes for BWICs. We are often faced with a credibility tax where we are asked to or feel the need to prove ourselves before we're even heard. How did you use your instructional expertise to establish your authority early on and to kind of overcome that credibility tax that people attempt to place on us?
Whew, what a powerful question. And immediately I thought about, and I keep going back to this because it really is when you first enter a space. And we've always heard first impressions are lasting impressions, right? So I think about when I think about credibility, I think about the fact that I have two choices when I walk into a space.
Mm-hmm.
One, I can be humble and I can walk into that space and be quiet and let my actions and my words speak for themselves. Sometimes that works, but sometimes, sometimes I have to walk in and I have to almost, and this is the sad part of being a Black woman in leadership, I have to walk in with almost like my CV or my resume on my sleeve. I have to walk in and say, "Hi, my name is Dr. Shanita Anderson," instead of just walking in and saying, "Hi, my name is Shanita." And what I mean by that is I will have to bring up in conversations my expertise. I have to bring up in conversations that not only was I an instructional coach in my building, and I have several years of official training on how to coach, or that I work for the State Department of Education, or that I work at a Research One institution. I have to bring those things up so that my voice is heard. Otherwise, I will be muted. And that, and me even having to say that is, it makes me sad. It makes me sad that I have to show up differently than someone else. But I do. I oftentimes do.
So I do show up differently, but I have stopped running down my resume because people laugh when I say this, but Dr. Courtney Tate is the same person that Courtney Tate was prior to achieving my PhD. I was just as smart then as I am now. I was just as qualified then as I am now. Now, of course, a credential adds wisdom and insight and it does add some level of prestige for some folks. But at the core of who I am, I have started to push back against it because, and I know the same is true for you because we've presented, regardless of what they think when you walk in the room, because they do see us as a Black woman first, 5 to 10 minutes into whatever is being presented, the work speaks for itself. The
Mhm,
credibility speaks for itself and it's there. And I have literally seen the room disarm once it's been
mhm,
there. I have absolutely had to walk in a room, not with the intention of giving my credentials, but being asked, what did you do before this? And then there's always the comment, oh, so you really do belong in the room,
mm,
which is a moment where, you keep your smile and I say some things in my mind, but I keep it moving. But to that to that end, it made me feel as though I don't have to run these credentials down. I am in the room and I know I belong in the room. And so this is how you start to redefine the role and you redefine that identity as a leader and how they see you as a leader by how you show up. You come prepared. You know what you need to know, plus some. If you're leading a team at the instructional table or the planning table, you come having resources beyond what they have so that you can
mhm,
provide an extra layer. And so for me, a part of redefining that leadership was starting to think about, without naming it, how do I show up as credible? How do I show up as an authority so that when people started thinking about they needed literacy support in the building, we're going to go to Tate. When I started doing work, doing professional learning for a company, and I did a lot of math support, the district is calling, hey, we need some strategy on XYZ. What do you think about this? It got to the point that I would have principals like, hey, do you have a moment for us to talk through some strategy? This is what I'm thinking about implementing next year.
mhm,
Not related to content at all, but just as I walked the rooms and walked the building, they saw who I was and they saw that identity as a leader rise up without the credentials having to be on the forefront. So I hope that we can get to the place of a better balance because I just feel like I want to counter the narrative that we have to prove and run down credentials when in many instances we're far qualified. We're qualified far beyond our peers. We're educated far, our education far exceeds that of some of our peers. And so that expectation infuriates me. And, I'm a little bit of a rebel. So I try to push. You laugh because you know it's true. I try to push back against that a little because I know that when I speak, I come prepared and so that's what I want to speak volumes. Today, guys, I was even telling Dr. A, like, oh, I need to put doctor in front of my name. I never use it. But it is something that I know people need to see, but I'm trying not to lead with it as much as I can so that you can just see me for the leader that I am and the preparation that I've put into place for this.
And I
Any
think
other
that
thought?
I was going to say, Courtney, I think that comes with time too. And as you were talking, I was thinking about connections to your narrative there. And I think that comes with time. And what do I mean by that? So even in my role now as a professor, I do not always require my students to call me Dr. A or Dr. Anderson. I now sign off with just Shanita. And I think it's because of a little bit of what you're saying. I no longer feel like I have to prove my worth in that room. I'm in the room. And I think though that that develops over time because as a new person in a space and a lot of coaches, unfortunately, we think about teacher turnover, think about coaching turnover. A
Hmm.
lot of times new coaches are entering a space and they don't have their coaching identity, right? So they're trying to figure out number one, oh my gosh, why did I get selected for this? I think I'm out of my depth. I can't get the teachers to buy in. I can't get them to do et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they're having to pull on what they've done in the past. They're having to pull on who am I to lead? Who am I to engage in these conversations? Do I have what it takes? So they're pulling on those credentials. And I also wanted to say before I forgot, that whole listing of the CV, listing of the resume, while, those letters and acronyms and all the things we put behind our name, to me, they were always like checklists. They were checklists to get keys.
Yes,
They
absolutely.
they weren't because I wanted them, because like you said, I knew I had it. They were checklists for me to get keys to the room.
Absolutely. And I wholeheartedly agree with that statement. I was talking to one of my friends. She's a white colleague, she's an ally, and we have a very similar background of our journey from classroom teacher to district support and now consultant and coach. And I told her, you know, to do this work, I have to get my doctorate
Hmm.
to have access to folks in a way that you have access and you don't have. I don't even
Hmm.
know if she has to have her master's to get the same access that she gets. Which is why I guess because I have it now, I feel like I'm not you're not gonna make me have to roll down my credentials. But even before then, I remember sitting at the table as an instructional coach in a building, first year there. The coach was going on maternity leave. I was transitioning into her role, and I remember looking at a white male, probably 50, maybe younger, but he looked 50, at the opposite end of the table. He looked me in the face while I was leading PLCs one day and said, "Well, why should I listen to you? When I was in middle school, you weren't even born yet."
Mm.
And I said, "Well, you're right." And I said, "And if you want someone to listen to you, you can go and fill out an application and you can become an instructional coach. And then be the person that they're going to be listening to talk at the table. But until then, this is what we have. So you can do this or you can leave." And it was that space of I'm new here, but I'm not new to this work. And
Mm.
my age does not disqualify me, nor does my race disqualify me from doing this work in that way. He would
Hmm.
have never talked to anyone else in that way. And so I had to be very clear. Now, inside, I was fuming, I was nervous, I had all the feelings, but I also knew they called me to come and do this job. Like I I know what I'm doing, and don't question me in front of all of these people because you don't like that I'm young, black, and in this leadership role. And so I think in me again, the rebel in me has always been a little bit there of I'm going to do the work, so I'm not going to spend too much time trying to prove to you I belong in it. My results will speak for themselves, and you'll know from my work that I belong here. You'll know from how I grow and develop leaders, and that's how you know that I belong in the room. I always said I want to work myself out of a job so that when I leave, the folks can do the work just as well as I can, and I can leave feeling good that that place is in a good space, even without me there, the work can continue because sustainability also has to be a thing.
And Courtney, I was thinking about, that intersectionality of identity and coaching and leadership. And something that I've just come to understand in this work is that context and coaching matters. You
Yes.
where you're located, where I'm located, and some of our listeners are located, it especially matters if you're in the minority, if you are a Black instructional coach. You know, we don't get to walk into spaces as a neutral presence. Like you said, my Blackness shows up before I do.
Hmm.
And um, that my identity walks in with me and how people see me and how they receive me, the assumptions they make, it all shapes the coaching dynamic. Even in that conversation, before you even say a word, there was already judgment. There was already things that were starting to formulate in our coachee's mind. So for me, coaching isn't just about those instructional strategies like in your narrative that you just shared. It's about navigating something, trust, credibility, those relationships
Yes.
in ways that are often layered and unspoken.
Absolutely. And, even in those moments, because you are going to encounter resistance. I try to say that almost every episode. You have to know how to encounter it, how to counter that resistance in a way that's still receptive. And you did a perfect segue of talking about navigating relationships because as an instructional coach, the boundary span that you're navigating is really tough, right? BWIC showed how they're navigating two different languages, the language of the front office in the classroom, but also as a Black woman trying to navigate this work and being fluent in all of those languages as they're kind of doing the work. And so you mentioned trust being a big part of that. And I know a big part of your research was trust when you're coming
Mhm,
into a space from the
mhm.
outside. So you know all about navigating relationships as an internal and an external stakeholder. So I kind of want to start there. Um, how do you navigate the paradox of being a peer to teachers 1 minute and then a representative to administration in the next without breaching the trust of the teachers you're serving as you're updating administration on the work you're doing as a coach?
You know, um, Before I get into that, I think it is important to go back to that trust piece
Mm-hmm.
and how you develop that trust. And especially in a lot of the work that I've done in recent years, um, probably the last 10, 15 years, is navigating that from an external coaching standpoint. And that term may or may not be familiar to all. So let me kind of break that down. When we're talking about internal coaching versus external coaching, and there isn't a lot of research out there about it. When I wrote my own dissertation, I was really struggling with the fact that I was coming in from the State Department and I I could not gain traction quick enough for my coachees, the principals, the teachers that I was partnering with to engage in the work. It was almost like there was this barrier. There wasn't this willingness to be vulnerable. And then one day I had a brave coach tell me, "You're from the State Department. I know why you're here. You've been triggered to come here because we're not doing something right." And I thought in that moment, wait a second, but it's me. I'm not going back and having tea and crumpets with the state superintendent. I'm here to help you. And I
Mm-hmm.
recognized that I needed to establish that trust. And in that moment, I thought about why is trust so necessary in our work? And it's because without trust, there can be no vulnerability. And without
Yes.
vulnerability, there can be no change. I can't get you to open up if you're not willing to be vulnerable. So when I think about that delicate space, again, that in between, there's so many elements of coaching that's in between. That in
Mm-hmm.
between space between working with that teacher and then working with the leaders within that building, It is so important to have clarity, clarity in the role, that why I'm there, what I am capable of doing, what I'm not capable of doing, what I will do, what I will not do, and have those conversations on the front side, not on the back side. And what I mean by that is if I'm working with a teacher, I always start with the principal because I want the principal or the administrators to know that I'm going to have conversations with teachers. I am going to share this, and this with you, but I cannot share any more than that because
Yes,
if I share more, then I am not going to be able to get that teacher to engage in the coaching process. It goes against the very nature of coaching. And I help them to understand what it means to have a coach because oftentimes we throw that word in there. Oh, we're going to have a coach. Well, they start with, we need to train the teachers that are going to be the coach. No, you start with the leadership so that they understand the coaching role. You start with them understanding what I can and cannot do. And one of them is to break that trust in that coaching relationship. So I
absolutely.
go ahead.
Sorry.
Go
I
ahead.
agree. I think that it's developing that culture of coaching. So when you know you want to have a coach in this space, you have to lay out very clearly or articulate what does coaching mean in this building? What does coaching look like? There are the 10 roles that coaches exist in. I always think of Joelle and Killian. I can't think of her partner's name, but they've established those 10
Harris,
roles of coaches.
Harrison and Killian.
Yes. And so you have to be very clear on what those roles look like, what coaching is. Coaching is not for people who are not doing their job well. So you have to also move away from that narrative so that folks are not afraid to be coached because they feel like I'm only being coached because you think I'm ineffective. And so I think as instructional coaches, you are countering a lot of bad publicity that we have gotten in these
Mhm.
streets, right?
Yes.
And you're getting people to see like I'm in this to help you. And so when you were talking about trust, I also thought about how much more people are likely to lean into coaching when they know that you are genuinely there to support them. They know that you are genuinely there. It's not just another to-do list or another check off for the box, but you've invested in their development as much as they are invested in the coaching process.
Absolutely. And I think that helps with breaking down any resistance to the coaching process. If all, what they say in the church, if all hearts and minds are clear in my role and what I'm there to do. And I think that's why it starts at the top. And from there, having those conversations across the building. And again, it's going back to those daily things that you're engaging in and understanding that um, the teachers are clear in what I can and cannot say and do with administrators. And when I have those initial conversations with teachers, here's a little coaching practice. I will oftentimes start with um, always thanking them for allowing me into their space. And I let them know you're in charge.
Yes.
You're the person in charge. You are the expert in this room. I am your thinking partner. I am somebody that's like a reflection. I am someone that I am here to support you, to track things for you, whatever it is that you need to help you to grow so that we can improve student learning outcomes. That's why I'm here. And these are the
Hmm.
things that I told your administrator. These are the things that I will share, and these are things that I won't share. And any notes and anything that I do in your space belong to you. So I really make it clear that I am really there as a support. I had this one colleague when I worked at the State Department that said, help should feel like help. It should
Mm.
not feel like more work. When working
That's
with
a
a coach,
word.
I know, right? And it's just always stuck with me. Help should feel like help. And I try to make sure that when I'm working with my coachees that it feels like that. It's not more work.
Yeah, that is powerful. And it's true, help should feel like help. I may use that, figure out who I need to credit for that statement. But I love that. Any other thoughts on really just maintaining that relational trust without compromising instructional authority?
Um, with teachers, I try to be very intentional about showing up as that thinking partner, not as an evaluator, because, like you said, we're really trying to fight that counter narrative. A lot of times in the courses that I teach, one of my final assignments is I just ask them to reflect on what they thought coaching was and what coaching actually is. And I promise you, and I'm going to lowball it, I'm going to say over 75% say that I did not know this is what coaching was. This is not how I see coaching in my building. And now I'm really excited about working with a coach.
Well, and you hit it on the head when you said coaching, like it's like I'm a thought partner. To me, it's almost like you're thinking aloud, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm here to ask you questions to get you to think about things you didn't think about before. But in education, a lot of times people want coaching to be directive instead of facilitative. And so there are some instances where it might be directive, which means you may have to tell folks what they need to do, blah, blah, blah. But it really should live more in that facilitative realm. And
Mm-hmm.
I always say when you think of coaching, it's ask, don't tell. You're not telling someone what to do. You're asking them questions to get them to think about the work or to think about approaching it in ways maybe they hadn't thought about before. Now, a lot of times you are going to be boxed into this is the topic that I need to coach you around, if that's the principal directive, or it goes with that continuous improvement. However, then the teachers have the autonomy to fill in the space of, okay, if we're talking about standards aligned instruction, then this is what I actually want to, this is what I need help with, or this is what I would like the focus of our sessions to be about. So the power of them still having that authority within the realm of that coaching space is important for teachers to know as well. But a lot of times people want you just to sit down and tell them what to do. And that is just not the work of a coach.
No. And you asked me that final question of any like lingering thoughts, and leading with transparency and naming that role, protecting your coaching conversations and being consistent, not carrying information between spaces that breaks trust, making sure you're communicating clearly with any leader within the building about your role as a coach, about how you're not an evaluator, and just making sure that you're staying grounded in those relationships. Because the bottom line is, if teachers don't feel safe, the work doesn't move.
That is so true. And a nugget for folks to really hold on to and take with them as they're thinking about stepping into that coaching role and defining their identity. A part of your identity is you want to be a safe place for teachers.
Mhm.
And so making sure you don't breach that trust with administrators is something that I've shared. I remember in one session we presented together, we mainly had district and school leaders. And when we brought up like, the expectation of what you hear back from a coach, they all were like, oh, I hadn't thought about it. I'm like, yeah, you are asking them to tell you everything they're engaging in a conversation with teachers, you're gonna breach that trust. And once it's broken, it's really hard to regain it if you ever do regain that trust. And so thank you for sharing that nugget
Oh,
with
yeah. And
everyone.
I always say, I'm not the bridge between teachers and administrators. I'm a partner to both of them.
Mhm.
But trust is the currency, and I'm going to protect that at all costs.
Absolutely. I love that. So our last section is totally focused on BWICs. It is around identity, but from my dissertation, this really showed up as redefinition of self. And so this involves BWICs having to kind of redefine their leadership identity to resist those external labels that are placed, the stereotypes that they just naturally walk into. Because as you said, when we walk in the room, you're going to see our brown skin. And so, have you had, or how have you had to rewrite the story of who you are as a leader in your building or in your role as a BWIC?
You know, as a Black woman in instructional coaching, identity is not something that I get to just sit down at the door. And right,
Hmm.
we talked about that. It walks into the room with me, um, and I'm aware that sometimes before I even speak, there are assumptions that are just kind of being made about my tone, about my authority, about my expertise, and about my intentions. And with that being said, in my own leadership journey, which is still continuing, has been about learning how to navigate those stereotypes without letting them define me. Early on, I think that I felt the pressure to adjust, to soften, and to overprove to make sure that I was received in a certain way. But I will say, going back to something I said earlier, over time, I realized that constantly reshaping myself to fit other people's comfort was pulling me away from my purpose. And in that, I had to rewrite my narrative as my story as a leader, not as someone who needs permission to lead or someone who has to shrink to be effective, but as someone who has a voice, who has a presence, who has a perspective, that I'm an asset to this work. And that looked like me showing up and walking into that room. And as you stated earlier, not just being prepared, but being over prepared, speaking with intention, making sure that the statements I made wasn't something that I was just giving lip service to, that it was focused on our main objective. And let's be clear, our main purpose is to improve the academic and overall achievement of students. So that is how I walked into that room. That's how I grounded who I am. I spoke from a place that was a commonality, that should be a commonality for all of us, which is helping children. And I let my consistency in doing that work do the talking. So I recognize that I was not there to disrupt the room. I was there to elevate those that didn't have those keys, that weren't able to be in that space. So I don't spend my energy trying to change people's assumptions about me. I'm trying to spend my energy showing up in a way that kind of speaks for itself.
That is the only way we can be, right? Again, when you're newer, sometimes that might make you stumble a little bit as
Yeah,
you're navigating and figuring that out. They might even the way that we dress, right? When
yeah.
we show up in the room, you know there is a judgment just washing over you when you walk into the room. But it is so much of what you just stated, and not letting that shake your leadership, not letting that shake who you know you are and what you come into the room to do or into that space to do. You still do that work and you do it well. And to me, the consistency of showing up every day, showing up, doing it well and doing it great, being a thought partner, being a leader, turning that data around, helping those teachers who want to grow reach those growth targets. That is how you start to redefine that leadership role, or redefine how people see you in that leadership role and how they're trying to identify what a BWIC is or classify what a BWIC is. You're countering that. BWICs don't have shortcomings. We come with excellence in everything that we do. And it's having people to see that by how we show up. And we don't have to yell that from the rooftops because people know it.
Mhm.
They
Mhm.
know it about BWICs, they know it about Black women in general. And so it's being consistent in showing up in that way so that you are creating the correct narrative by your actions and through your work. Thank you for sharing that. So now I have a question if you don't have anything else to add to that.
I don't.
Okay. If you could go back to the year one coach version of yourself and thinking of other BWICs that aspire to be a coach, that are in a coaching role, Black women leaders in general, but we niche down to BWICs. What would you tell yourself about claiming your identity as a
Mhm.
BWIC?
If I could go back to year one as a coach, hmm, I would I would tell her to slow down. You
Mm,
don't have to prove yourself so quickly. I think early on, I felt the pressure to have all the answers to show my value right away. Um, and what I've learned is that coaching isn't about having the answers, it's about asking the right questions and building that trust over time. I would remind her, you do not have to shrink. You do not have
mhm.
to overcompensate. Your voice, your presence, your perspective, they are part of what makes you effective. Um, I would also tell her to continue to focus on the relationships because I truly believe it is the relationships that even got me to the role of a coach.
Mm.
To continue to listen more than you speak and to trust that the impact is happening. And that's something that all leaders can truly grow from. Impact is not going to happen instantaneously, it takes time. And even when it's not immediate, you have to be able to see the vision. You have to be able to see that these small micro coaching moves are going to impact students and teachers.
That is well stated. As coaches, you don't have to be the expert on every topic that you're coaching someone
Mhm.
on. You just have to be able to ask the right questions to help them navigate. They are the experts. You're talking to the experts.
Yeah.
You're just helping them to dig into and tap into some areas they likely haven't tapped into. Now, that doesn't mean you're not well resourced. That doesn't mean you might not be an expert on a certain topic. But when you put your coaching hat on, you
Hmm.
don't have to come into the room from the perspective of an expert when you're
And
doing that coaching.
Courtney, for those that might be in predominantly white settings, because that's where a lot of my coaching lived for a very long time, and that's why I spoke earlier about context and coaching matters. Please hear me when I say, whether you try to shrink yourself or not, they still see you. Your blackness shows up regardless. So show up fully as who you are.
Absolutely. Because you can't perform but for so long. You have to be
Exactly.
who you are. And I think people can appreciate the nuances of or the quirkiness of how you do show up when you show up well. And you're not trying to be this person they want you to be. It oozes out of you and you
Yeah.
can lead naturally without having to put on a show.
Yes.
Well, I think that sums up our conversation today. We have been able to pull back the layer on Dimension One identity. And as Dr. A shared so beautifully, this isn't just about a new office or having a new title. For the BWIC, this is a radical redefinition of self. It's about standing in your authority, refusing to pay credibility tax, and holding the line between being a trusted peer and a strategic leader. If you're listening today and you feel like you're constantly having to prove that you belong in the room, stop. Because you're supposed to be exactly where you are. Your expertise is the evidence, and your impact is the receipt. Identity is the foundation, but what happens when the identity is tested? In our next episode, we're moving into Dimension 2, resilience. We'll discuss emotional labor that comes when you're working in this role and how to strategically navigate the resistance that comes with being a change agent. Dr. A, thank you so much for being my first guest on the podcast and engaging in this conversation. I have thoroughly enjoyed talking to you about this topic, and I hope you will join me again on Leading from the Middle.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tate. I've enjoyed the conversation as well.
All right, we'll see you all later. Thank you for listening to Leading from the Middle. For more research notes, articles, and insights, if you found value in today's episode, consider sharing it with a colleague who is leading from the middle of their school. I'm Dr. Courtney Tate, and I'll see you in the middle.